Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. I'm glad you're here. I'll be interviewing CEOs who have successfully scaled their B2B sales organization. In each episode, I'll start by uncovering the sales background of each CEO, dig into the strategies they use to build their sales organization, and wrap it up with what the future holds. We'll cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of scaling a sales organization. I'm your host, Alice Hyman. Welcome to Sales Talk for CEOs. I'm your host, Alice Hyman. And today I'm excited to have Jacco Kooij with me from Winning by Design. Now, Jacco, I've been watching your company grow for many years now, and I'm really excited to have you share because you've changed a lot of things since you started your company, and you've continued to grow and really very, very impressive. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Welcome to the audience and your listeners. It is a privilege and a treat to be here with you today.
Thank you. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about what Winning by Design is doing today? And then we'll kind of rewind and go back and talk about how you started it. But let's hear about what Winning by Design offers to its customers.
We help companies scale their revenue anywhere from $20 to $50 million all the way up. And in many cases, we help companies ramp up to their IPO rates so that they can go IPO. We do that through playbooks, coaching. We do that through growth analysis. And we do that across the full funnel, anywhere from marketing, sales, and customer success, and across all market segments, anywhere from product-led growth, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and so on and so forth.
There are a couple of things that are very impressive about what you and your company espouse. And one of the things I wanted to mention was that since the beginning, you have always talked about sales, marketing, and customer success. You know, people are now calling that go-to-market. They're calling it RevOps. They're, putting a lot of names around it. But you and I, maybe we've been around a little longer, whatever it is, but we know that we cannot win purely by focusing on sales and what sales does, and that it's more of an effort that we do together with customer success, marketing, and other departments in our company. And you have always espoused that. And just say a few words about that.
Well, I think that in general, when we look at selling, it's not what the customer wants. What the customer is involved in is buying. And, instead of selling them, which is against their nature, help them to buy, which is, the human nature from the get-go. In order to do that, we can't look at the buying behavior as something that simply takes place on a moment in time that the seller picks up the phone or starts an email. This happens all across the entire lifespan of the customer. Most of it, for example, you'll see that customers generate nowadays a lot of new leads, and as we now start to see based on data, how much leads actually get generated by happy customers. It's to become clearer and clearer that selling is not an activity done by a single function in a company, but it's done all across the full bow tie by all people involved that are engaged with the customer.
And exactly that. I love the model that you built with a bow tie because it's something I've tried to get across to my clients for many, many years. And sometimes it's harder than others to get it across, but the sale is not finished when you close the deal and sign, and maybe they even pay you, but we're not done.
Yeah. So Winning by Design is focused on companies with recurring revenue. And recurring revenue means that after the first deal is done, the revenue is not quite there yet. And truth be told, even when I sold large-scale infrastructure equipment to the likes of AT&T and DirecTV and so on and so forth, it was not that the companies made really a profit on that first deal. It took many years of deals in order to do so. So many companies have in their blood recurring revenue. We may call it a perpetual, we may in the past have called it on-prem, but the truth is, it will take multiple sales in order for a company to become profitable selling to the company. Yeah. Now,
absolutely.
Right? And in order for that recurrence to happen, we have a simple statement. And that statement is recurring revenue is the result of recurring impact. Yes. If you want to achieve that your customer buy from you, you better deliver on the first time you sold to them. If you keep that mantra in your mindset, then you very quickly come to the conclusion that the standard marketing and sales funnel does not represent what happens after it very well. We call this outside of the purview of the marketing and sales funnel. Or as I put two things together, recurring revenue takes place outside of the purview of the marketing and sales funnel. And things that you don't see, you don't report on. Things that you don't see are not important in a boardroom. So by us having defined the marketing and sales funnel and only limited, it has caused all kinds of issues for organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that companies who are not paying enough attention to what's happening after the deal, right? And you have customers for years that you're just basically leaving money on the table because you haven't gone back to them or understood them or talk to them about what else could even possibly be. So yeah, I just love that the focus is there. And I think it's really important. Many times I see companies with recurring revenue waiting till, 2 months before the renewal. And like, it's too late. You've made no impact up until now. Well, we sold them the product. They've been using it, right? But their user adoption isn't where it should be, or there's some other issues. And now you expect them to renew. Well, it's crazy, right? And you and I have both seen it. So anyway, I just love that focus that you have. Now, you have grown tremendously since 2013 when you started this company. But let's go back to the time when you started Winning by Design. What were you doing right before? I mean, you have a long history of a sales experience, but what were you doing right before you started it? And what was it that prompted you to start this particular company?
What prompted me, I was fed up with something and I had a chip on my shoulder, which I think is many cases, like a founder, early stage CEO has this, like something went wrong and they wanted to prove the world that it could be done better. So in my case too, what I was doing before is repeatedly being a vice president of sales. And what I felt is that the VPs of sales were misunderstood. The tenure was debatable. In those days, it was not 18 months yet. But it was already getting shorter and shorter. But there was something wrong with the way that VPs of sales looked at their business, were treated as part of what they were doing. And I didn't like that. And so one day I decided sales should be treated differently, and I wanted to set that up, and that's the reason why I started Winning by Design. And it's what it was about is being scientific driven, being data driven, and so on and so forth.
Very good. And so when you first started Winning by Design, were you doing all of the selling for your company?
Absolutely. I mean, I was doing the selling, I was doing delivering, I was doing creation. Like in those early days, you don't end up being the CEO of a company. I don't think you can be the CEO of a company, of a one-employee company. And I would argue that many founders who start their company, they probably don't like being they don't like a lot of the CEO job. What they like is the working with the customer, whether that's from a product angle, from a sales angle, from a market, whatever that is. But they like working with customers.
Right. So we start our company because many times, like you said, there's something we're dissatisfied with or something we feel like we can do better than somebody else is doing. Not necessarily because we know how to sell. In your case, you did, which is a bonus, right? But we start up and then we are the one doing everything. And then as the company grows, we're wearing many hats. We start to give a few of those hats away. Where was it in the growth of Winning by Design that you decided it was time to start hiring a sales team? And then how did you go about doing that?
Well, in our case, I started that pretty early on, but I don't hire salespeople. I don't think that early on you're hiring a sales professional to sell. I think that a common mistake is to understand what the problem is you're solving, and therefore you're bringing in the wrong solution. And let me give you an explanation.
Yeah.
Early on, what you'll do as a founder CEO, but anybody early on in a company, they understand the problem really well. They understand what's going on because that's the reason why we started in the first place. That's the reason what got us frustrated. So we know very well why we're doing it, which problem we're solving. As we then get along, we build a solution for that, whether that is product, whether that's services, we see that the CEOs and founders of company really start to be getting super involved in the solution. They know the solution very well. Yeah. So now they know the product very well. They know the solution. They know the problem very well and how to solve for that. So they step in, and with that passion of being, in part frustration, in part excitement, and putting that in front of the customer, they are very well able to provoke the client to reframe their thought process because they came from the same world. They sat behind that same desk. They ran into that same problem.
Yeah.
This is the reason why when you bring in salespeople early on, it won't work. Because as the CEO founder, you've been involved already 5-10 years into this, in seeing this problem develop. And you've been working maybe 2 years or 3 years on a solution. So it is very normal, very native to what you're doing. But the new salesperson, it's not. They go like, give me a price list, give me like product, give me like something, and I'll, quote template, and I go at it. Therefore, I don't recommend generally to start off as salespeople. What I generally recommend is that you hire people who are passionate about solving the same problem or passionate about having the same solution. Because those people can be early on be taught how to sell, to create certain selling motions.
Absolutely. And if they have that passion and they're smart, they can absolutely become and will become salespeople by nature versus by, oh, I've hired someone who knows how to sell. And I've seen it happen too many times, Jacco, where a CEO is like, oh gosh, I've got too much to do now. I need to hire a salesperson or a few salespeople or a sales leader or something. And then it fails because that person doesn't have that passion, doesn't have that same understanding. And the CEO will say things to me like, I outsell my salespeople every month. And I say, of course you do, because they don't have that passion and that drive. They don't have that deep understanding that you have. And they are just looking for you to provide the materials they need so they can go out and present to people and try to bring in customers. And you and I both know, especially in the early days, it just simply doesn't work.
That's right.
So I love that you look for people with passion and recommend that in the beginning. And then everybody starts to know and understand the problem, like you said, and then it just happens more naturally. And sometimes I think, especially these days, we're looking for the wrong type of people when we're hiring sellers. And I think we need to rethink that and maybe have a different view of what a good seller is and what the skills are that are needed today to be in sales and to understand a customer.
Sure. Look, skills, yeah. It's a hard topic, and I'll tell you, you have skills and traits. Traits are a person is an introvert or extrovert. A lot of the traits actually don't matter at all. I have as many introverts being great salespeople as extroverts. I have as many people in the world, and obviously consulting for many organizations and helping them set up their sales organizations. There are as many scrappy people as there are very structured people. It's all over the board. There's not like one particular person. It doesn't work like that. What works really well is when you understand that early on in sales, the lion's share will come from the people you hire. The lion's share comes from the superstar talent. And so early on, you often bring on talent that you have worked with before. You can't afford to have if you're bringing on a team of 4 or 5 in those early days, to know none of them. Like, you should know already 2-3 people from the past so that you know that they're gonna perform fairly well. So that's one. When you grow, and the understanding where growth comes from, it comes from these original salespeople that are selling. You need to capture their stories. You need to capture their experience. Yeah. A lot of folks historically come from the individual contributor world, where on Monday a sales professional leaves on a flight, comes back on a Thursday night, and needs to do all the reporting on a Friday, and the next week the cycle starts over again. That's no longer the way that sales works. Nowadays, it requires a lot of online meetings, a lot of cooperation, sharing of best practices, where historically you would not share where you got your best lead from. You would not share what your best sales practices were. And so today, we still see a lot of that, Alice. A lot of those remnants still hold sales as a trade very much back, and to the point that when we're hiring, we're looking for people who've hit quota historically. We look people who've done large scale sales, and we go like, although past performance can be an indicator, in certain cases, it shouldn't be held as the only metric of bringing on a sales professional.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm looking for people with passion, creativity, grit, people, who want to grow. And
yeah, but I don't, like I beg to differ, but in order for us to start that conversation is like, I don't know if grit is the right thing. I do not know. And I'll tell you why. It's like, look, do we really want people to keep chasing like someone down? You always hear the story, hey, I only responded after his 12th email or something like that. Well, anybody that pursues me with grit in 12 emails, I can't deal with that. I'm sorry. And so my question to you is grit, is that actually the indicator that we really think it is? Right? And the reason is because I deal with every day, Alice, at so many false positives that we say it is X or it is Y. And I'm not saying it will hurt the person per se. I do not know that for sure either. I'm just saying is over the past 2 to 3 years, a lot of these false positives have been shattered, and I no longer believe that they were as important as they once were.
Well, I think that's very interesting. And I think it's important at each company for leaders to figure out what is the right combination, of personality traits, skills, passions that you're looking for when you are hiring so that you can get the right salespeople. So I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. Grit may not be one of them.
You know what we have done there? Because we simply ask anybody who puts on the job description when we recruit, and we ask the same thing of all the companies we support, right? Show me a 5-minute video. We need you to shoot a 5-minute video. Okay, that will eliminate 95% of all people, right? Because they don't have a video. Like it was clearly written in the instruction, job description. We want to see a 5-minute video. If you today can not use a 5-minute video stream, knowing that is what is the primary way of communicating, then I'm sorry, in many cases, there's no need for you on a sales team, right? So that's one. Second thing is, we believe that it's absolutely detrimental that they are proving during the interview what they need to be doing. So if it's an SDR, make them write several outbound emails, make them go through the motion. Not the preparation. It doesn't need to be prepared extensively. They say okay, let's open you up with your screen share, hit Zoom share, and do some research on me. Talk to me. What do you see about me on my LinkedIn profile, right?
Right.
If you don't know that, SDR falls through. AE, if you do not know how to set up a discovery call, you fall through. VP of sales, do a forecast. Here's a spreadsheet. Run a forecast for me. So I believe that ultimately, aside from all the traits, asking people without much preparation to literally do the job right in front of you is the best way to figure out if they're a fit within your culture.
That is so helpful for everybody listening. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think that is an excellent way to determine whether they can do the job or not. So back to when you were, hiring these passionate people who started working with you, they believed what you believed, and that was awesome. And then at some point you more formalized your sales organization. How did you decide when it was time to do that? And how did you start to formalize that so it was around the customer and the way the customer really wanted to buy, which I know is super important to you?
Yes. So the nature of growth works against many CEOs, and it works like this. If you grow from $1 million to $2 million, you doubled your number, and your investors, whoever is you're representing, go oh my gosh. But if you grow at the same rate from $2 million to $3 million with the same amount of people, and you do the exact same thing, you're gonna have naturally slowed down growth. You went from $2 to $3 million, which is a 50% growth, versus from $1 to $2 million, which was 100% growth. So growth in essence, within the growth and how we calculate growth, requires that you need to hire more and more people to bring on more and more revenue to keep the growth up. And particularly, this is very much the case between $5 and $50 million. That demand for growth and that keeping up the triple, double growth is extremely it occupies a lot of CEOs' minds.
Yes.
And so you cannot do that by growing only in one dimension. You cannot say, I'm just hiring more salespeople. Right. You have to think in multiple dimensions. So for example, I'm growing my number by hiring more salespeople, and I'm increasing my price of the product. And on top of that, I'm having more products to sell. So now I'm growing based on more products at a higher price, sold by more sales professionals. Yes. That is a way how you need to think about growth. That means that we are looking for salespeople that are expanding either a territory in a region or product, being able to sell a product that we may have not originally intended the company to go to, or to go from SMB to enterprise. So we have a person who has more skill set with multi-tier decision making versus high velocity decision making. So you hire and you meet your people to do it, or you bring on the people you need to do that. And that is what we did. We went for primarily regional at first, so expand very quickly. We were very early on in Europe, very early on in Australia, and very early on in Latin America. And we expanded that very quickly as an additional dimension, giving us the opportunity over the years to create great stable revenue growth as the American market at occasions faltered, internationally picked up. And as we have seasonality, that seasonality was also covered for internationally. So we create a lot of stability by creating international expansion.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And I think it is so multidimensional, and many CEOs who may not have a background on sales or the best advisors necessarily maybe are not thinking that broadly. Many times I hear, CEOs say, well, the investors want this much growth. I need this many salespeople. And I say, that math just simply doesn't work. You would think, if one salesperson can carry a quota of 1 million, 10 salespeople can carry 10 million. But unfortunately, the math doesn't work quite that way. And so I like the way you mentioned the combination of, raising the price, bringing in, building more and different products to send out there. And then, in many cases, companies do things like they find resellers or partners that can also help them grow. And so there's just so many ways to do it. And I think it is something that we need to think more creatively about and more multidimensionally about. You just don't add another salesperson and get to hit your number. I wish it was that easy, right? That'd be so awesome, but doesn't always work quite that way. So Jacco, now that you're 8 or 9 years into this, right, and very popular, you've got so many great things going on. The companies you work with are doing so well. What does your sales team look like today, and what % of their time is spent on the other side of the bow tie that many people forget about, right? So after the sale, and you've got a customer and you're going to get some recurring revenue from them, and how do they split their time between going out and finding new customers and taking care of the ones that already know you and love you?
So we think in the concept of stackable units. And a stackable unit means, for example, it's very traditionally East Coast, West Coast would be a stackable unit. East Coast have a bunch of resources, West Coast have a bunch of resources. And if it would historically be sales, I have the East Coast Vice President of Sales and the West Coast Vice President of Sales, each with 3 or 4 reports. That would be a stackable unit. Unfortunately, sales in itself doesn't work like that standalone anymore. Yeah. So we have to recreate a stackable unit. We call that a pod. And so in this case, if I want to, even in the Winning by Design's own case, we have a group of people, which we call a pod, that applies before and after sales activities, may involve a program manager, architects, a bunch of experts, and we bundle them together. That's a stackable unit. In our case, let's say that the stackable unit can create $2.5 million in revenue annually. We know what that's the cost of that stackable unit are, and we say, well, if you want to launch another $2.5 million business, you got to invest in that entire stackable unit. You cannot just add an additional rep to it and call it good, because that additional rep needs additional leads, that additional rep needs additional help in deploying the projects, and so on. Now, we make, as part of our pod, we find that the salesperson in generally is a very good leader of that pod, and therefore we call that the managing director role. Now, a managing director managing a pod of resources in order to deliver a stackable unit of revenue at a fairly fixed level of cost allows us to scale revenue faster and quicker. And that's the way how we have historically built. And today we have about 18 managing directors with all stackable units. Let's say we have an average of somewhere between $1.5 to $2.5 million. It gives us a fairly stackable new revenue growth, giving every month over month.
Right. And so do those stackable units do both dimensions, and they go out and find brand new business with people you've never worked with before and take care of the existing customers to do more business with them?
It's about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 comes from from our business, where like inbound flow that hits the Winning by Design website. 1/3 comes from themselves, like working out, doing networking and so on. And 1/3 comes from the certain projects we do together, books that are being created, and so on and so forth. But the last 1/3 often is not directly attributed to existing marketing programs, but in many cases it comes from a word of mouth, a client moving from one account to another account, former students who move and pick up the phone directly to the MD and say like, hey, like this is happening. But that is about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So we have 1/3 by the company, 1/3 they do themselves, and 1/3 is a mixed match of both parties helping to generate leads.
Which is it's a great mix for them to have to develop that new business. Now in that unit, so once they land that new business, right, and then now you're delivering, is someone on that same team then taking care of the customer after that?
So we are a professional services company. So as we develop professional services, it's not like a product that you can switch on, you do the onboarding and call it good and wait 10 months for the renewal, as you pointed out earlier. So for us, there's two key roles that manage the ongoing relationship. One is the program manager, which generally is like, facilitating the process of delivery. And the other one is the architect. We call them revenue architects. And a revenue architect really sets up the client. It takes them to the journey of, hey, today you're here, you want to get there, and then outlines where the future journey could like, additional services or products they need to be buying, and so on and so forth. And so for us, it's the revenue architect that sets up the stage and pulls the MD back in order to do the upsell or cross-sell.
Nice.
Now, in our case, Allison, most of our sales opportunity runs to the CXO's office. And so since it runs to the CXO office, it really does require an MD with expertise, and we call it boardroom presence. The ability to provoke a CEO, to handle a confrontational conversation, to handle, like stuff like that. And that we nowadays hire for. That boardroom presence is a real key requirement for being an MD at Winning by Design.
Yeah, I really, that's a model that is so interesting, and I think will help a lot of the CEOs who are listening to rethink the model that they have. I like the stackable units and the fact that they're working together as a team, because as you mentioned earlier, and I've been saying over and over, the days of the lone wolf seller are gone. No customer wants to be approached that way. They want to engage with you at whatever point with the proper expert that they need at that moment. And they want a team of people. They want to know that they're secure in working with you and that there's someone there who can help them when they need it, right? So these pods are a very good way to manage all of that. And I'm curious, as you mentioned when we were earlier, when I was asking you about your history, and you started out doing all of the selling, and now, 8-9 years later, what is your role in sales, and how do you take a look at it? Because you graduated from probably, doing all the selling, then you were managing the sellers, then you built the sales organization and hired someone else to manage the sellers. And now I understand you've even stepped back as a CEO into the founder role. And so I'm just curious what your role in selling is now today.
So I no longer, it's twofold, and I'll be straight up. I am not as easy and as capable of selling as I once was. And it's in part because I think I've lost patience. And what I mean with that is when a customer comes to me, and, I would say that at this point in time, I personally have worked with somewhere between 500 to 600 companies personally, right? Like work with CEOs and founders, how to grow anywhere from 1 to 10, 10 to 50, and 50 to $1 billion sales, right? And then when we go to the large companies, I have to say we don't deal with CEOs at HP or companies that. We deal with some senior vice president or executive vice president, right? So, keep that in mind. But once you've done with that, I have to say I've lost some of my patience. When a founder comes to me or a CEO comes to me and says they have the problem, and I pretty much know what the problem is, right? Which, nowadays I've run into so many times, I'm no longer proving I'm right. My job is to prove I'm not right, right? Are you the one exception in 1,000 that doesn't obey to the laws of nature, right? That's what I'm in the market of these days. And so when I see that that person on the other side doesn't have an interest in that, but says like, look, I don't need to know all that. I just need you to train my, like 20 SDRs and 30 reps. I go like, look, we're not helping anybody with that. We're not helping you. We're not helping these people in their careers, and we're not helping your customer with just doing that. Like that no longer is an option. And so when that happens, I have to say, as my MDs I've often found out, is I'll take a step back and say like, you're no longer a fit for us. I'm sorry. And I walk out. So the MDs didn't like that. So I am less invited on these calls nowadays because I'm like, yeah, it's not our thing. We shouldn't focus on these kind of clients that have that kind of mindset. So in that case, it pains me to, as I become older, that I've lost some of that patience, and maybe you would call it customer centricity. But in the end, I just refuse to take their money. So that's one problem on one end. I think on the other end, I find that many sellers have actually started, particularly if they're being with us for like 2 years or so, that they are quite more capable than I am. And that they are, I don't know, they have just developed a skill that I no longer have. And not no longer have, that I no longer favor, or that I no longer use. I just get straight to the point. If I have a 30-minute meeting and we can do it in 15, then let's do it in 10. Like why not? Like, why do we need to get, we know the right? And so hence I'm no longer that ultimate seller, and I don't enjoy that as much either. I hope I don't disappoint you with that answer.
No, not at all. And I think that, the role of the CEO in sales evolves as the company grows and ages, and as you put your sales organization in place. And I think for you, you've evolved to a role where you're now, a strategist and providing what the sellers need in these pods to do their job. And that's where you sit best.
Absolutely. No, I have to be. And I knew you were in the lead up to this. We had this conversation. I also stepped out of the CEO role, right? I stepped out and handed that off to a wonderful colleague, Dominic Levin, who picked up that role. So also the operational parts. And all I can say, Alice, is that, what we struggle with as CEOs, this is typical alpha nature territory. And I'm not saying that in the negative or with any other things. It's like, look, by the time you get at the place that where I'm currently feel I'm at, right? At 20, we're at $20+ million in revenue. We do about $2 to $3 million every month new, right? It's a professional services business, so it doesn't recur. I've had so many people tell me it won't work. You won't get there. That won't sell. You can't scale. You cannot do this, right? And so by the time you get to this particular point, you're stubborn. And so you've actually made it to this point because of stubbornness. It's not because it's a requirement or anything. It's like, it's the only way how you get here, right? If you had listened to all the naysayers, you would have never gotten here. So this is a natural outcome. And so that puts you in alpha territory. And so in this alpha territory where you're at, whether it's up against another alpha, trying to sell to another founder or something like that, it creates a certain tension. Now, what I found is that when I stepped back from my CEO role, it required me to recognize that actually I'm no longer the best fit for the company as a CEO. And having helped over the years, having been fortunate to have helped many CEOs transition and found that their company stopped being successful because the CEO became the bottleneck, right?
Right.
And so I decided I don't want to make the mistake that I've helped them prevent, and I stepped back. Yeah. That is a very scary thing to do, because you will wake up and you will have kind of like nothing to do. You kind of like will wake up one day, and that is not only the problem, Alice, but the biggest problem is somebody else is doing your job, but is not doing it the way you want it to be done. They're doing it their way. And so you have a tendency to not want to give that up, because you go like, no, but it's got to be, in my case, it's my company, it's my thing. Right. And so you got to let go. And I find that, the one that I think I'm pretty decent at is I encourage people to go make their own mistake. I encourage them to do it their way. I encourage them to debate with me. And if they don't agree with me, if you're the CEO, you have the right to make your decision. This is your company as much as it's mine. Culturally, that's where I put the line in the sand. Obviously, culture is, I believe, very much the role of the founder and the CEO, but the founder needs to make sure that line is maintained very well. But other than that, you got to let your CEO go out and often make a mishire here and there, do a product launch that maybe is not complete. Let them just, like learn from their mistakes, because it goes 10 times faster as long as they're recoverable mistakes within the reach of recovering quickly.
Right. Absolutely. I think that it's a bold move, to let someone else become the CEO of your company. It's a bold move. But it sounds like it was a smart one in your case. And I think there are many cases where CEOs who founded their company should consider that. When is it time for me to let someone else run the company?
And that doesn't have to be an overnight decision. I think it's not like, okay, like we went into the Christmas holiday and I was CEO and we came out of it and I handed it off. I think that you can take a year for that. You don't have to rush that through, right? And if you need to take 2 years, take 2 years. Groom the next person to be that person. Yeah. So this is not something that you got to rush. But when you find the right person, which I found, I'm very lucky to have found that in Dominic Levin. It took us 2 years or something like that. And as a result, I think we as a company have flourished, and she's doing a way better job, growing it way better than I ever could.
Wow. You've done an amazing job, Jacco, and I just love hearing your story. I so appreciate you sharing everything with us. I'm just curious, what's coming in the future? What do you see? And I mean, you and I both, are in the middle of hearing about all of the things that are changing, the buyers changing, the marketplace changing. But one thing that isn't changing is human beings still make decisions, right? And we have to help them do that. But as far as your organization, how do you see your sales and, your whole go-to-market team really accommodating the customer and what's coming in the future?
I'm very excited about where we're going as an entire, trade of marketing, sales, and customer success.
Yeah.
And why? Because I believe that we are entering the realm of science. We're going to see scientific principles prevail. We're going to see data, metrics, A/B testing, all of that is coming to play.
Nice.
In this, we're going to see that companies more and more will hire quants or, people with advanced understanding of mathematical principles and apply that to sales. What we see is we will start talking about closed loop systems rather than open loop system. Most organizations run a completely open loop system, meaning the amount of leads they get every month, is responsible for the amount of sales that gets generated. That's a completely, open loop, outdated concept. So all these mathematical scientific principles are coming to play in sales. I believe that is where we are very focused on. We share lots of videos on that and where we're headed, and it is becoming clear that no longer selling is just a gut feel. We still believe that the pure skills, no, not skills, that there are certain things that somebody does during sales that really matter. I do respect if somebody has 20 years worth of experience and tells us that win rate is not supposed to be 20%. That's supposed to be 30%, right? Then we say is absolutely, that is a gut feel. That is like 20 years of experience tells us. But let's prove that with the data. Let's go out and prove with the data if that is right. That means that combination of historic experience built over multiple years, not over hey, I just learned last week that my email sequence needs to be 15 long instead of 12 longs. Please no. But over historic and time, over a long time, combined with data, will prove us where to go next. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, that is exciting. And I agree with you. I will be excited to see this more analytic view coming into sales as we move into the future. And I think it's going to help all of us so much. Well, thank you so much for being.
No. Now let's follow it out. What is the one thing that you picked up on today that stood out to you that say that's different? I didn't hear that before. That changed your mind on something.
I think there's a lot of things that you said that I've been thinking about and talking to CEOs about that, they're moving towards, but not quite. Like the idea of the pods is something that I've been thinking about. How do you set up a team to go forth with customer, to engage the customer at the different intersections, right? But most companies are still so siloed, Jacco, that they can't quite do it. So I got this idea from you by listening. It's like, okay, so how do you build these pods out, right? And I think for every company it could be a little bit different. But it's something that they definitely need to think about. So what they need a lead salesperson. I call them orchestrators these days. You call them managing directors, but they need to orchestrate their own internal team and they need to orchestrate the external team that they're selling to. And so if you think about that and then take your idea of how you built these pods, I think that will be very useful for the CEOs out there that are listening. So I love that. And also, just at the end here, where we're talking about this more analytical view, and we talked about it earlier too, the math, right? You just can't hire more salespeople and get where you want to be. It just doesn't work like that. So we do need to look at all of the things that we do in sales and apply a more mathematical construct to it. Using the history, yes, our gut's important because a lot of times it's right. It's sometimes better than the numbers. But if we use that historical information and then think about, things a bit differently, I think we can come up with much, much better ways to do things. And certainly much better ways to forecast, which is still a difficulty for every company that I have ever worked with.
Well, thank you for the take. That was a phenomenal take. As you were talking about pods, it gave me time to something percolated up that I think is also important for the listener to contemplate. What pods do is to create mini communities, and these communities in a remote world start to have their own meetings and their own things to do. Now, what a lot of customers over the past 2 years, what a lot of customers are struggling with is what is productivity versus activity.
Yes.
And the way what you pay for. Now, we essentially want people to productive. Activity is not necessarily of interest, only if it leads to productivity. So if we skip that out, we say really what we want is productivity. And what these spots are, their mindset is that people keep each other in check. Because you can't check, it doesn't make any sense to check when somebody's Slack light turned green, right? Or when somebody's on the calls that they're supposed to, checking how many meetings they have booked on their calendar. That seems to be, totally wrong. But what does make sense is people help each other become productive. And that means 4, 5, 6 people working together have a higher chance of becoming productive. So that's number one. The other thing that when you talked about the data and it is, there's this inherent problem that we're experiencing, and I'll explain the concept briefly. The concept is the system as a whole is more than the individual components of each part. If I have marketing just generating MQL, and if I have sales just turning MQLs into wins, and if I have CS just turning every win into a recurring revenue stream, if I think of that, what we live in the world today is that we double click on each of these functions. We then highly optimize them. We provide them volume metrics and the data-driven nature on each of these subsystems.
Yeah.
But then we think we have optimized it perfectly. And then we connect it. And then the MQLs that we are optimized and the cost is low, that subsystem which now delivers it to the seller who turns that into a win, suddenly when the CS person turns that win, it doesn't end up being the recurring revenue stream. It ended up being the total wrong MQL that was sold on the wrong reason, and therefore we should have never sold them in the first place.
Right.
Now what we get is that the concept of the entire system is bigger. What today's organizations are struggling with, not by optimizing these individual systems. They're doing a phenomenal job at that. Tools, everything is ultimately available for that. But to forget the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is you have to make sure that the entire system as a whole has its own properties. You have to think of that. And that means that your MQL needs to be matched to what your CS can deliver, and so on and so forth. That was the scientific principle that when you fed back what was your key takeaway and your pod. Those were the two things that stood out to me. I'm like, that's a good point to emphasize on.
Very good. Absolutely. Gosh, I really like you bringing some of the things you bring up, a bit controversial, but really important. And you've said it several times in several different ways. Not all customers are the right customers for us. And the sooner we stop selling to the ones that are going to make our lives miserable, that are not a good fit, the sooner we'll be able to open up space for the ones that should come in and will be our best customers. And so I think that's a hard notion for many to let go of, but it's so important, because isn't it a lovely world when we get to work with customers who appreciate us, we appreciate them, we have great relationship, we can work together to really invest what is needed to help them just propel and scale, which is what they come to you for in the first place. And when they come to many of us, all they want to do is get to their next level. And we can help them do that if we're careful and a little bit more choosy, right? A little bit more choosy about who we do business with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, okay. Now I'm going to say thank you, Jacco, for being on the show with me. I so appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing for the world of sales. And I just love following you and watching all the great information that you're putting out there. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to all your listeners for spending some time with us.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Sales Talk for CEOs. You can find me at alicehyman.com. Be sure and connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know that you heard the show. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, write a review, and share the show with another CEO.